Cheating in Western culture has never been well regarded socially. Despite this, kings, being men and having the authority, committed such acts throughout their lives. Even against the church or society, they would resort to the army or the law to enforce their personal will. Things were different with queens. In France, a law condemned the woman in case of adultery. Sometimes, no proof was even needed that she had committed such an act. All it took was a rumor, and the victim's reputation was ruined. Taking all this into consideration, we have listed 5 queens who, throughout their lives, suffered accusations of adultery. Some were proven, others not so much. We start the list right off with Anne Boleyn, the second wife of King Henry VIII. Elizabeth's mother began her affair with Henry VIII while he was still married to Catherine of Aragon. Henry found in Anne Boleyn the opportunity to have a male heir, but the two had a troubled relationship that ended in a conviction. On May 15, 1536, the Queen Consort of England, Anne Boleyn, was sentenced to death for high treason by the English Parliament for the crimes of adultery, incest, and treachery. She had already been imprisoned in the Tower of London since May 2nd of that year, after serving a reign that lasted approximately 1,000 days. Anne Boleyn was accused of having sex with her brother George, of whom she was said to have become pregnant. Her marriage to Henry VIII was annulled 2 days later. Anne's guilt was never proven. Thomas Howard, 3rd Duke of Norfolk, and her uncle presided over the court that sentenced her to death. She was beheaded on May 19, 1536. The 4th place is Josephine, the wife of Napoleon Bonaparte. Josephine walked her own path to power, pretending to be humble where she felt ambition, hiding under her false smile a longing for superiority. She was the perfect counterweight to the emperor's rough posture. When he was still only a general in the French army, Napoleon went to a ball, where he met the widow Josephine. She was a beautiful woman, mother of 2, who had attended the circles of the French elite since the death of her husband Alexander, who had been beheaded 6 years earlier. Napoleon Bonaparte married the widow Josephine in 1796. Deeply in love with his wife, Napoleon wrote lush love letters that confess his complete devotion to her. In contrast, his wife cheated on him with other men and did not bother to answer her husband's love letters. With the end of the Egyptian campaigns, he returned home and once again did not find his unfaithful wife waiting for him. Enraged by Josephine's behavior, Napoleon concluded that divorce would have to end the rift between the failing couple. Desperate by the decision, the wife threw herself at her husband's feet, begging for forgiveness. Seeing her in tears, Napoleon could not resist and pardoned her. After this incident, the general rose on the French political scene with the support of the population, who saw him as an unquestionable national hero. In 1804, Napoleon became Emperor of France and made Josephine Empress. Due to extramarital affairs, Napoleon's mother loathed Josephine and refused to attend the coronation. And the third on this list is Margaret of Valois, the famous Queen Margot. She was the 7th daughter of Henry II and Catherine de' Medici, renowned for her beauty and vivacious spirit. Margaret married at odds with Henry of Navarre, future Henry IV of France. Margaret had a lifelong admiration for Catherine. However, after the Night of St. Bartholomew, where Margot was used as bait in a Machiavellian plan hatched by her mother, the Queen's relationship with Catherine changed. After going through a huge ordeal, Margaret of Valois decided to live by her own rules, ignoring that this destroyed her image as queen. But she still continued to be used by her family as a political tool in favor of her husband and mother. A Catholic queen in a Protestant country, Margaret was considered one of the greatest figures of that era. Her liberal behavior became a catchphrase, "Live free like Margaret." She loved life's pleasures and made no point in hiding them. In theory, marital fidelity was only required for women. But the new Queen of Navarre decided to ignore this and give vent to her feelings. Her affairs were only surpassed by those of her husband. Her marriage to Henry was troubled, with constant coming and going between them. But the extramarital affairs never ceased. For Margaret, this situation was even more worrying, as an adulterous queen used to be sentenced to death. But because of her position at court, sister of one king and wife of another, she was not killed. However, her affairs were revealed and she received multiple punishments, excluding exile. In 1593, Henry of Navarre, already King Henry IV of France, wanted the marriage annulled. His wife's scandalous conduct, coupled with the fact that she had failed to give birth to a male heir to the crown, made her undesirable as a consort. Apart from the scandals, she was a determined and active woman. She wrote an autobiography and other books, as well as being a patron of art. She died on March 27, 1615, and, were it not for Salic law, would have been the rightful reigning queen of France. Centuries later, the Romantic era eventually paid her a huge tribute. Thanks to the pen of writers such as Alexandre Dumas, Margaret of Valois became known as Queen Margot. And, in second place, is the Russian Catherine the Great. Ambitious and seductive, she married her cousin, Peter III, out of interest. Both collected lovers. A conspiracy by the Russian palace guards, engineered by Catherine, according to some sources, drove Peter from power. Instead of ruling in her son's name, in keeping with tradition, she decided to declare herself queen. During her reign, she resisted several attacks from the Ottoman Empire. An advocate of the arts, culture, and women, she opened the Moscow University in 1783, and the first school for girls in Russia. Having lovers was common at the Russian imperial court. Catherine was no exception. At 23, after 8 years of not sharing a bed with her husband, Peter III, she got to know carnal pleasures with young Sergei Saltykov. He was beautiful as the day, Catherine wrote in her memoirs, showing that the young man was the father of her son, Paul I. Saltykov got fed up with the empress, but many others followed. "To my misfortune, my heart cannot spend an hour without love," she confessed in her diary. Among all the lovers, the most powerful was Lieutenant Gregory Potockin. He had an influence on the Tsarina's decisions and was perhaps the only one she loved. When sex became colder, Potockin started selecting new favorites. In fact, being a favorite was a profession. Such a man was entitled to a salary, and, when he failed to please the queen, he was compensated with land, rubles, and servants. The new candidate was examined by a doctor and subjected to an intimate test with the countess, who then presented a report to Catherine. Only then would she make the decision. With or without reason, Catherine the Great was the subject of gossip during and after her life, but she did not become known in history as great by mere chance. A notable example of this is the notion of the enlightened despot, found in Enlightenment ideals. She was a modernizer, stabilized the kingdom, and increased prestige on the European continent. She also conquered Turkish lands, something that not even Peter, the other great, had done. She died on November 16, 1796, age 67. 34 of them lived as Russia's absolute ruler. And first place goes to Carlota Joaquina. Born in Spain, she married John VI when she was just 10 years old. They didn't consummate their marriage until she turned 15. Despite living in separate houses, they had 9 children. However, the children had quite different biotypes, and the possibility of having different fathers was always talked about. Carlota never wanted to please anyone or hide her strong personality. She paid no attention to moral standards and only did what she felt like doing. She was hated by the Portuguese court, who nicknamed her Shrew of Queluz, and was also hated by her subjects, scandalized by her numerous affairs, and by her influencing her husband in favor of the Spanish crown. In 1808, she moved to Brazil with the court, where she stayed until 1820, always living in a different house from her husband. She hated Rio de Janeiro's hot climate. In fact, she hated every minute spent in the country. When she boarded the ship to return to Portugal, she is said to have taken off her shoes and shaken them off so as not to take even a speck of earth with her. Although a racist, she enjoyed receiving young slaves in bed and regularly hunted for lovers in the port. Back in Portugal in 1821, she refused to pledge to the flag and her Portuguese citizenship was revoked. According to author Marsilio Casolti, it is very difficult to prove that she had affairs. Carlota was the target of a negative campaign by the Portuguese and English governments. She was an enemy of England. These affairs were legends constructed by political enemies to discredit her. According to Casotti, the reports of extramarital affairs were born after Carlota had plotted a coup against John, whom she considered unprepared to rule. Her plan was to intern her husband to take his place. and rumors emerged that, among the queen's lovers, there was even a friend of the king. Stories of infidelity involving employees of São Cristóvão Palace, Quinta da Boa Vista, including a gardener, were also common. For example, there was the suspicion that Carlota had ordered the murder of Gertrudes Angélica Pedra Leão, wife of the commander Fernando Carneiro Leão. Carlota was considered the commander's mistress, and, out of jealousy, had ordered the assassination attempt. The whole life of Carlota is extremely controversial. Even today, it is debated whether she really had many affairs, or if she was the victim of a smear campaign. One thing is certain, this couple had plenty of quarrels, intrigues, and cuckolding, episodes that crossed the ocean and reached Brazil. 200 years later, we are still talking about them.